Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, and welcome to another edition of Dudes Talking Metal. I've got the dudes in the house, Tony and Butch, and we're here to share with you some of our metal knowledge, talk a little metal with you. Now, today's episode, we're going to be talking about disappointments, disappointing albums, albums that were letdowns for us, but from bands that we like. So, bands that we like, and maybe an album from them that was just kind of a bummer for us, a letdown, if you will. So, Butch, you want to kick us off here with what was your what's your letdown record here?
All right. I mean, this isn't really like a metal band. I mean, they're not a metal band, but they're popular with hard rock fans. They've been one of my favorite bands since I was a kid. Um, a great rock and roll band, one of the best American hard rock bands of all time. My favorite power pop band of all time. And I don't even have a for this record. I don't even have something to show because I dislike this record so much. And I'm talking about Cheap Trick, and
Oh,
I'm talking about Lap of Luxury.
oh,
Um,
yeah.
which came out April 12th, 1988. It's actually the band's second biggest seller, like studio record, right behind Dream Police. It made it to number 16 in the Billboard charts. It was certified platinum here, Canada, and Australia. Um, it had their only U.S. number one hit with The Flame. Their cover of Don't Be Cruel went to number 4. And then they had a song called Ghost Town, was a ballad. Another ballad went to number 33. There's another song called Never Lot to Lose. They released as a single, but it only got to number 75. Here's the thing about this record for me. Like, I love Cheap Trick. And the thing is, like, after Dream Police, they started a gradual kind of decline in fortunes. Like, All Shook Up came out, and by the time the record was out, Tom Peterson was gone. Um, but they were still touring and headlining. One on One came out. They had some success with She's Tight and If You Want My Love on MTV. And it's a really good record, good hard rock record. First with a guy named John Brandt on bass. Um, Next Position Please comes out next. And it finds the band like drifting more from that kind of like they always had that somewhere in between like a those Beatles kind of vibes, but
Mhm.
in a hard rock. They delivered it in a hard rock kind of way, and they had some kind of like they would do some quirky stuff in there from time to time, and they're always just really colorful, like lively, like hooks galore in their music. Robin Zander, and this has never changed about him, no matter what the whether I like the record or not. Great vocals, like one of the most amazing vocalists of all time. Um, but their fortunes were failing, and Standing on the Edge came out, and although Tonight It's You got some airplay on the radio and MTV, like it just wasn't. They weren't picking back up to where they were. And then the Doctor came out and was a total cluster bomb of a record. Like it doesn't sound anything like it's a weird like 80s like overly keyboard ridden like mess of a record. Which and so it begs the question, why didn't I pick that record? Well, because I don't know. There's like a weirdness about the record that makes it more closer to what I liked about them, even with that it being the mess it is than Lap of Luxury, which is an obvious um, attempt by the label. The label forced them to use outside writers. They let
Mm.
them pick writers that they were more comfortable working with. But it is a very, Tom Peterson came back for the record. So you have the classic lineup of the band again. But it's a very late 80s sounding AOR record, really. I mean, there's nothing about it that sounds like Cheap Trick to me. Like, other than Don't Be Cruel gets kind of close, but it's kind of like, I don't know, the production like
Yeah.
makes it kind of limp. Ghost Town is okay, and it's kind of like in the same vein as like Voices or World's Greatest Lover, I guess. It's a little bit of a moodier ballad, but it's still, I hate The Flame. I loved it at the time because I was a Cheap Trick fan, and there was one thing I was glad for was it like revived their career. And honestly, as much as I dislike this record, I always have to, put the asterisk next to it that I'm happy for it because it revived their career, and who knows what would have happened to them had this record come out and just failed. Because since 1997, we've gotten like great album after great album from them that connects again with what was so fun about them and what was great about them. You know, the edge is back, and the great songs are there, and they're not like doing like these, having all these outside writers on the records like Diane Warren. I mean,
Yeah.
it just, this record and Busted were just not for me. Like, of the two records, like the only song like I can really kind of like on Lap of Luxury is All We Need Is a Dream. And no surprise, it's because Greg Giuffria co-wrote it with the band, and the song starts with like, you know, this keyboard thing going on, and it sounds like, the beginning, it sounds like Angel and Giuffria. Once it gets into the song, it kind of becomes another 80s like AOR kind of like, and I'm anything against AOR, I just don't want Cheap Trick doing AOR. It just doesn't work for me. It's like, you know, I didn't like when Heart turned to AOR in
Yeah.
the 80s either. But with Cheap Trick, the one really, that it really like kind of bothered me because it's just not, it just took me aback like at how not them that record is. And I wish they would cut the flame from their live set, but I know they never will, because there's a group of
Such a
fans
big
that, you
hit.
know, they brought fans on board with that song. So it's always like one of the last songs that they play in every
Yeah.
set. They change their set list all the time, but it's always, you know, you always want Surrender and Dream Police, and I Want You to Want Me. Love them. But it's always, the flame is always in there. And I just wish just once when I was there, they would drop it and play Voices instead, or World's Greatest Lover, or even Ghost Town, for God's sake. Like, don't give me the flame one more time. If I hear it again, my head might explode. I
Yeah.
listened to the record again, like preparing for this episode, and my wife was like, "What are you listening to?" And I said, "I'm listening to Cheap Trick's Lap of Luxury,
She's like,
because, you know,
why?
we're doing this episode about records we don't like by bands that we love." And when I turned it off, I was just like, she was howling, because I was just like, I couldn't turn it off without going ill
Yeah.
when I shut it off. Like, it just, if it hurts anyone's feelings that I don't like this record, on, you know, if anyone from Melodic Mafia is watching this, sorry. I put it in the same place I put Brian Howe, Bad Company.
Yeah, I hear you because I'm a huge Cheap Trick fan, and I think I made a video at one point with bands that make me think of certain eras. And when I think of the 70s, I think of Cheap Trick. They're like one of these sort of quintessential 70s hard rock bands. And they're also one of these bands that did not transition very well through the, or they struggled in the 80s. You know, they sort of lost their footing, but they had enough hits to keep them alive, to get them on MTV, to get them through the 80s. But yeah, that's definitely, it's hard for me to listen to that record because it's so, you know, again, Cheap Trick is one of these 70s, you know, hello there, ladies and
I know
you
they
know,
always have like a raw kind of like a, almost
exactly.
like a
It's raw.
punk edge
It's
at times, even like in their music. Like, there was a mix of things, and then they do these four records in a row, like The Doctor and Lap of Luxury, Busted, and then even like Woke Up with a Monster was a step in the right direction, but it was like, it was kind of like just, the writing wasn't as, it was like
yeah, they never
they're
got
cutting
back
back
on
into
it.
it, but the writing wasn't quite there. It was like when Priest went from Turbo to Ram It Down. Like, Ram It Down was a little heavier, but the songs weren't that great.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yep.
that's my first one.
Good pick. All right, Tony, what's your first pick?
Well, I've been a Manowar fan for ages, and just classic Manowar, like the first five albums or so. It's just great stuff. But in 2002, I mean, after waiting, King, I thought Louder Than Hell came out in '96. I loved it. I thought it was a great album. It was their first, I think they did for like Geffen Records, and how they even ended up on Geffen Records and to put an album out in 1996, and during the grunge and new metal period. I'll never know, but I really love that record. So we wait 6 years for the next album, and it comes out, Warriors of the World, and they're on Metal Blade Records by then. And man, it is just such a letdown. I mean, the opening track, Call to Arms. I mean, it's okay. It's nothing great. Uh, the fight for freedom. It's just this cheesy piano ballad. That's your second track on the album. It doesn't even start out with a hard hitting song to start with. Then it goes into a piano ballad. Just then they do an opera song, Nessun Dorma, which is an Italian opera song famously made, I guess, done by Pavarotti. Just, I mean, this is the band that did Kill with Power and you know, Sign of the Hammer and Kings of Metal, and it's just
Powerhead.
like, yeah, God, it's just like, it's just like, okay, can it get any worse? It just keeps going. Then they go into American Trilogy, like Elvis did the American Trilogy, and it's just Eric Adams, awesome singer, excellent singing voice, but I don't need to hear Manowar do this. This is not what I want from Manowar. I was just like, God, this is just getting worse and worse. Then it goes into this orchestrated piece called like The March. It's just it sounds like some kind of soundtrack, score or something. Just Then it has a song called Warriors of the World. I remember they made a video for that one. And it's kind of a lame song. It's just a repeat. It's just the same rhythm, the whole song. It never changes. It's got just a lackluster guitar solo in it. It's just not good. Same beat, just no energy to it at all. Um, the last three tracks, Hand of Doom, House of Death, and Fight Until We Die, pretty good stuff. More back to classic Manowar. Those tracks are the only reason I even held on to this CD. And this would be pretty much the last purchase that I did for Manowar. I did just never dug themselves back out of this hole for me. And I did see them in concert since then and enjoyed the show. But this was just such a letdown after 6 years to come back with basically the soundtrack to, Last of the Mohicans or something. I don't know what they were going for here, but it's just not good at all. So yeah.
All right.
Such a
All right.
disappointment.
All
They
right.
had to change their name to the Coasters because they've been coasting on those first 6 records for years now.
Absolutely.
Ouch.
But we have those records and they're so
Yeah,
great.
thank God. They're great records.
Yes.
All right. So my pick is not a metal pick. And originally I was going to pick something from what I like to call my big six bands: Priest, Maiden, Sabbath, Dio, Ozzy, AC/DC. But I've talked about like on Sabbath Sunday and podcast, and I think, you know what, I'm going to go outside my big six bands here. This isn't a metal band. So when I was in high school, I was really, really into Pink Floyd, and I loved Roger Waters. I loved everything about Pink Floyd. I liked the Final Cut. At the time, I was really into the pros and cons of hitchhiking, even though that album hasn't aged particularly well for me. I did a video about that on my channel, but I was totally into that at the time. So when this record came out, I don't even know what's upside down and not. It doesn't matter. Radio Chaos came out. I got it on cassette. I remember I was my first semester of college. And just like thinking about this album sort of gives me like a weird headache or something. It's so dated. I mean, Roger Waters is already a guy that if you don't like Roger Waters, that whole like him speaking, half singing, it's supposed to be some kind of concept record with some guy that is transmitting waves to a radio station or something like that. I mean, I don't know. So there's this like radio station dialogue that goes on with it. There's this robotic like voice, and it's just awful. It's very 80s. The pros and cons of hitchhiking, you had Eric Clapton on there. You had things that sounded like Pink Floyd. The pros and cons of hitchhiking was proposed when Roger brought the pros and cons of hitchhiking and the wall to the band, and the band said, let's do the wall. So it sounds like you could almost picture Pink Floyd being involved with the pros and cons of hitchhiking. This is just awful. It's dated. There's nothing catchy about it. I don't even, any of the songs, none of the songs stand out. I just remember being so excited about it, wanting after listening to the pros and cons a million times. I was ready to like put some headphones on and really get into this. And it was just terrible. It just left me. It's one of these weird, we could do an episode on like records that cause like a reaction when I think about them. This is one of those records. Like I start to, I think of like a cassette tape that's getting chewed up in your tape player, or that's warped or something. It makes me nauseous or gives me a headache or something. I can't listen to this record. It's just awful. And it was such a disappointment because I was on this like Pink Floyd obsession, and then it just came to a screeching halt with this record. And I pretty, like you said with Manowar, I didn't come back to Roger Waters until, and I know Amused to Death. I eventually came back to that, but I didn't even come back to him till Is This the Life We Really Want, which is that last solo album that he put out that I loved. And then I circled back to Amused to Death, but I was just so traumatized by this that I was just like, yep, I'm done. Didn't listen to Pink Floyd or Roger Waters for a while after that. So Radio Chaos, Roger Waters. All right, Butch, what's your next
All
what do
right,
they call
well,
those awards? Rotten Tomatoes? What's that website?
yeah,
What's your next Rotten
the
Tomato?
Razzies.
Razzie. That's it. What's your next Razzie award?
Well, I mean, obviously, when I think anyone that knows me, when I think about bands that I love, um, I have to. It's hard to do this, but a band that I love that's been around for 50 plus years and has done a ton of records is Kiss, and not every record can be a zinger. And that's the truth with them when you got into the late 80s. Surprisingly, for years I've maintained that this is the worst Kiss record. Um, and Peter Chris's solo album accepted, but of the band records, like this for years was my bottom of the barrel. Surprisingly, for whatever reason, this record, as I've gotten older, has grown on me a little bit more. Like the Gene songs on here,
Same.
like I really like Thief in the Night is great. I like Good Girl Gone Bad a lot. Hell or High Water's cool with me. No, no, no is fun. Um, I'll Fight Hell to Hold You. I always liked that song. Um, and when I was a kid, I mean, I liked all these records when they first came out. It's like, but after a while, it's like the test is in the years to come. And in the years to come, this record became like, I'm like, what the hell was I thinking with this record? Like, I used to really like My Way on here, and I even like, Turn on the Night. Like, it's uh, it's something, this record. But this isn't the record that I picked because,
That's their Bon Jovi record.
yeah, of over the years, the one that ended up on the bottom of the stack now is this one. And when Hot in the Shade came out, initially I was like, it's a step in the right direction. I mean, it's a little bit more raw. It's not as like Tony was saying, it's not as Bon Jovi, or they were trying to jump on the Bon Jovi Def Leppard thing with Crazy Nights, like really like radio themselves out, like keyboard heavy, outside writers, get on the radio, and it didn't, I'm still shocked to this day that it didn't do better than it did, but it goes to show that with some bands you cannot make that flip with your fan base. You can't flip to commercial and expect to, for it to work for you. It killed a lot of bands' careers dead in the 80s before they could even get off the ground. And although Crazy Night sold better than Asylum, like it just didn't do what you figured it would have based on the style that it was or what they were going for. And same like for here, I mean, it's 1990, 89, and 90 was the era for this record. And they had Forever, which was like a top 10, I think number 7 hit or something like that, co-written with Michael Bolton. Um, and it's still at a time when hard rock was still pretty big. I mean, Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood sold millions of records. They came out roughly around the same time. And you figure with a big hit like that, it might have done something for them. The problem is the record is so mediocre in every way. And their choice of singles was rough. I mean, I still like Hide Your Heart. I will we had heard that song before this record had even come out. We were at a Kiss convention, and someone was selling, the bootleg tapes. Back in those days, you could get them. They were big. And we bought this. We each got a copy of this bootleg that had the demos for Hide Your Heart and Sword and Stone on it. And we played the shit out of it. Love those two songs. It feels kind of watered down a little bit on here. I think it's still a good song, but I don't know, maybe not the best first single. But then the problem is they used Rise to It as a single, which at the time, like there were things I found about this record that I thought were cool, and I liked the song at the time. I thought it was a good opener for the record, but it just doesn't hold up. It's kind of like an average kind of song. Betrayed is okay, Hide Your Heart's okay. Prisoner of Love I still kind of like, but then now we get into Read My Body, which is flat out maybe the worst song Kiss ever recorded.
That and Bang Bang You.
Worst. What's that?
That and Bang Bang You.
Yeah, those
Crazy
two
Nights
were in the top three. Like if it weren't for I Finally Found My Way to You, it'd be a fight for number one. Those are awful, awful songs. Like Read My Body is god awful. It's not like what disappoints me about this record is not that every song is crap. It's just that it's so like limp. Like it just has no life to it. Forever is okay for what it is. Silver Spoon is dumb. Like I don't like that song. Cadillac Dreams is stupid. That's another like one of Gene's worst songs. King of Hearts is okay. Street Giveth is okay for Gene, but I don't know. It's kind of like Gene by rote, kind of. I mean, he could write stuff like that in his sleep. I always like You Love Me to Hate You. It hasn't held up as much as I would have thought it would. Somewhere Between Heaven and Hell is actually pretty good. I actually kind of like that song. I never liked Little Sister, and it hurt Little Caesar, sorry. And it hurts me to say that because I love Eric Carr to death. I always wanted to hear him sing a lead vocal on an album, and the only times we got it was when they had him do Beth, and then on this song. And I just don't like this song. It's kind of like it's get this clunky kind of vibe to it that it just doesn't appeal to me. And Boomerang's okay, but again, it's like no, no, no part two. I mean, the best thing about Boomerang is Gene saying, "Turn on the juice, Bruce." I don't know. It's just a really lame record. And the tour was freaking killer, though. I mean, this is where they started playing, like, realizing, like, hey, we should be playing songs from the old records again. Let's rock.
Yep.
Again, the tour was phenomenal. The stage show was great. The set list was awesome. But the record just, man, it just doesn't hold up. I mean, it's just weak. It's a weak record. I've heard worse, but when we're talking about, the diagram of favorite band to disappointments, I mean, it doesn't, I don't know. When I thought of, I could have gone with, I was thinking about going with Judas Priest Demolition, which is a god awful record. That was probably my runner up to these. But in terms of like one of my favorite bands of all time, Angel has a record they put out in '99 called In the Beginning, but it's really just Frank and Barry with some guest spots from the other guys. But it's not like I don't hate the record. It just doesn't sound like them, and the production it's a weird, wonky record, but there's potential in it, but it just is potential that they never reach. So I couldn't include it because I didn't hate it. I immediately went to all my favorite bands like Thin Lizzy, love them all. Angel, and then I went to Kiss, and I'm like, oh, I got it. So, and then Cheap Trick. So that's my second.
Yes, ding,
Butch,
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think Hot in the Shade suffers is this one of those albums where you come into the CD age and they're like, oh, we could put 80 minutes worth of music on an album.
Too long.
So there's like 15 songs. I mean, we grew up on Kiss where you had, a 35-minute album tops. And this album is like too long, too many throwaway tracks. I mean, you mentioned Sword in the Stone, one of the best songs they've ever written, and it never made Hot in the Shade or Crazy Nights.
I know,
but
it's weird.
One track I will say, I think the most underrated track on Hot in the Shade, go back and listen to it, is King of Hearts. I think King of Hearts is a great track, and I think it should have been the single instead of Rise to It. You know, the Hide Your Heart track, I mean, that was co-written by, what was it, Holly Knight maybe, or something.
Desmond Child and Holly Knight. I mean,
yeah. And Ace ended up recording it on his Trouble Walking album. I think a performer named Robin Beck did it, and Molly Hatchet did a cover of it on their Lightning Strikes album, which was really weird hearing Danny Joe Brown sing about some dude named Tito, you know, which is really strange.
Bonnie
But
Tyler did it too, I think.
maybe it was Bonnie Tyler. Yeah, you know, so you know, I always thought when they did the reunion, I always thought it was cool. You know, they should have done Hide Your Heart and had Ace sing a verse since he did it. You know, that would have been kind of cool. You know, and they brought that song back a few years ago and started doing it again because the chorus is such a sing along chorus. You know, and get the crowd involved.
I'm really shocked it wasn't, again, like it seemed like it was tailor made for
That time
radio,
period.
and it just didn't. I don't know. People just didn't want this from Kiss, or it just didn't. For some reason, when they tried to do commercial things, it didn't work for them. I don't.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's, you know, they were always kind of like, they were popular, but in the next tier, they could never like. They would always try to like latch on to what everyone else was doing, but they were always a step behind, and they could never. It never took them to that rung. You know, they tried to do what Bon Jovi did, and they couldn't catch up. They tried to follow Rat and Motley Crue, and they just couldn't quite make it. You know, it's weird.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got for your second pick, Tony?
Well, I'm a huge W.A.S.P fan. Have been a big W.A.S.P fan since the first album, and I still follow them to this day. And even though I don't own a lot of the later stuff that they've put out more recent years, I've listened to some of it on streaming and all, and I think it's more like a Blackie Lawless kind of a solo thing, you know, that he's doing. But it's good stuff. So a lot of it's still good. But I'm a huge fan of Crimson Idol. I'm a huge fan of Still Not Black Enough. And of course, by then, Chris Holmes was out of the band. So when I heard Chris Holmes was coming back to the band, you know, around 96, 97, I was like, oh, it's great. I can't wait, you know. Well, they come out with this album, K.F.D., which stood for Kill, Fuck, Die. And it's an industrial album. I mean, it's just not what I want to hear from W.A.S.P. It's kind of like what Butch was saying about, you know, with the Cheap Trick thing about people and Kiss, you know, bands trying to jump on some sort of bandwagon to be relevant with what, you know, is out, what's popular now. And Marilyn Manson was huge in 1997. And Blackie was like, I think he just took that as a challenge. And he's like, hey, you know, this guy has debunked me now. Here, I'm the guy that used to have the saw blade between my legs and, you know, had the song, you know, fuck like a beast and threw raw meat in the audience. And here's this guy, you know, get people spitting loogies on him while he's calling himself Jesus Christ. You know, I've got to top this. So he comes out with this record, and there's some really good songs on this record, but they're overshadowed by this thin, industrial sounding production. It sounds nothing like W.A.S.P. It just, that classic W.A.S.P. guitar tone is not there. You've got Chris Holmes on it. I guess he's on it. They said he's on it, you know, but whether he played a lick on it, I don't know, you know. But it's just not what I wanted to hear from W.A.S.P. Now, there's some cool songs in here. Like I said, they ended up releasing an album. They recorded a live album on the tour, and I was just looking at the live album. There's versions of songs performed live. They did "Kill Ahead." They did the song "You," which is just the letter U. "Kill Your Pretty Face." The Horror. All these songs are co-written by Chris Holmes as well, supposedly. And song "Little Death." These songs sounded so much better live. They still had a little bit of industrial edge to them where they were doing some sort of effects with the guitars live to get that sound, but it sounded more guitar driven and less industrial when you heard them live. I just couldn't get used to the sound of this record. Like I said, there's some good songs on it, but it's just overshadowed by that thin production, and it's just not what I wanted to hear from Wasp. Of course, I ended up keeping the CD, and Mike Duda and Stet Howland actually autographed it for me at one of the shows. I did see them on the tour for this, and it was a pretty extreme tour. That's where Blackie introduced the mic stand that he
Oh, yeah.
basically stole the idea from Marilyn Manson. And he also they had a fake pig on stage that they sawed up with a chainsaw, and blood was flying. And I mean, they definitely were going to outdo to get back and be the reigning shock rock kings again. But they were doing it in small clubs versus where Manson's out on big stages doing all this stuff. So yeah, just was a disappointing album, because I was really looking forward to Chris Holmes being back in the band, and them coming back with something like Headless Children is really what I was hoping for. And I got a watered down Marilyn Manson 9 Inch Nails clone band instead.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that record. Now I got to check that out because it sounds really strange. And it's you have to put yourself back in that time in 1997, 1998. That stuff felt like it was going to be around forever. The industrial, the Marilyn Manson, it just felt like, hey, if you don't get on the boat, you're going to be left behind. So some artists just changed their sound to try to go with the times, and usually they land up falling flat on their faces. So I'm gonna have to check that record out. Okay, this one for me, it's not a letdown from a band perspective because this is their first record, but it's a letdown because I was a huge fan of this guitar player. So I was really excited for this album when it was going to come out, and that's Red Dragon Cartel, their first
Oh,
record from 2014. I'm a huge Jakey Lee fan. I loved Badlands. I should have been I should have been nervous because if people remember sort of the backstory on this, Jakey Lee's notoriously one of these guys like, whatever happened to Jakey Lee? Same thing like whatever happened to Vito Bratta? Like one of these guys that just fell off the earth. Eddie Trunk was always getting asked, "Hey, do you know anything about Jakey Lee?" I think it was Eddie that eventually tracks him down and gets him to come on his show, and it sort of starts this people talking about Jakey Lee again. This band starts. What a cool name, Red Dragon Cartel. I mean, like, yeah. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to probably be, you know, a mixture of like Bark at the Moon and Badlands. You're going to get the blues
But we
stuff, but you're going
hoped.
to get this cool metal technical guitar playing and everything. And then if you remember, he did a show. He did a couple shows. Like I think one was at the Whiskey a Go Go, and everybody's hyped for this because it's the first time Jake's played with a band in ages, and it's a disaster. The singer is a disaster. The band is a disaster. That should have been the warning. When this came out, I never bought it because I just listened to it on streaming. Uh, I was just so disappointed in it. The album's just a mess. Sonically, it sounds awful. The guitar doesn't sound good on it. It's way over compressed and really no dynamics. The guitar sounds like crap. The songs are just all over the map. There's nothing consistent. There's no like this is like Badlands. You heard Badlands and you immediately knew what was going on. This is a hard rock, bluesy, Zeppelin-y 70s thing going on here. This is like I don't know what it is. It's just an awful record, and I was so excited for it. The one that came out after it, I don't forget what it was called. That one was terrible. Also, clips of the band live. They changed singers a bunch of times. It was all kind of weird band drama. The band never seemed to click live, so it was just such a mess. And there was it really could have been something because so many people were talking about Jakey Lee and I mean, so many people, as in the people in, the world that are into this kind of stuff, were talking about him and were excited about this. And he could have taken that energy and just, if he had put out a good record, that would have shot him off like a rocket and he could have ridden that, but it just bombed. I have no idea. Are they even still considered a band? Are they, who knows? I think it never worked. And he just falls now into this weird category of like Vinnie Vincent and like these guys that just can't get it together. So yeah, just complete disappointment. I was so excited for this and it just totally let me down.
Yeah, it was a bummer hearing that record, man. I was really excited to hear Jake again, and man, it just didn't he use different singers on like a different singers on the
Is it
same
on the
record
first one that has the
on the
different
The
first
singers, or is
second
one,
it the
one.
second one?
second one.
I don't even remember. And again,
There was
it
a
was
couple of good tracks on it. I saw them live. I saw them at I saw them in a club. They played in North Carolina actually at a club, and it wasn't a great show by any means. It was just great to watch him play again. I mean, his playing, he was still playing great. I saw him at M3 that same year,
mm,
I think, and they were much better at that show. But that one show at the club, I think they were having some issues with the singer at the
mhm.
time, and it just didn't go over it great. But it was cool. I mean, he hung out afterwards. He didn't even do like a paid meet and greet or anything. It was just like, hey, you guys want to meet me? I'm going to come out afterwards. And he hung out and he signed some tour books for me and some Ozzy tour books and stuff. And he was super friendly.
Yeah.
But yeah, the record was a disappointment. And the second one, I didn't like at all. So I didn't even buy the second one
All right,
after I heard it.
let's do a quick lightning round of some things that almost made it onto your list. Just a quick go around. Give us some things that almost made it onto your list. Say a word or two about them. Butch, go.
Judas Priest Demolition. Don't like a thing about it. Think it's the worst record they ever did. Worse than
Okay.
Nostradamus. And I like Nostradamus way better.
Wow. Okay. Tony?
I was actually going to say Nostradamus because I was really psyched up about that one, and I've listened to it a couple times, and I got like the deluxe CD and the little digibook, and it looks nice up on the shelf next to the digibook of Iron Maiden Book of Souls, which is another major disappointment for me. But nice packaging on the CDs, but just don't really like that album either. Just never, and tried to go back and listen to Nostradamus and like it, and it's just I just don't like it. I mean, I like Turbo Light Years more than that.
Wow. Gotta go. I just did a episode not too long ago with two guys that have a Judas Priest podcast called Judas Priest Cast. And we rank the Return of Rob era albums. And
Mhm.
the one guy picks Nostradamus as his favorite record. And he goes into this whole explanation of this album, like tying it into Rob's life and everything. It's just amazing. You got to hear this guy
Wow,
talk
I need to
about
go back and watch that.
Nostradamus. But I like that. It's definitely a flawed album, but I like it a little bit more than most people. Okay, I had a couple here that didn't make my list. I'll just go through them really quick. Blue Oyster Cult Ghost Stories just came out recently.
Yeah,
Just total
disappointment, man.
disappointment. It's some sort of weird, I don't know, they used AI or something to redo old songs. There's covers on there. Just total disappointment. British Lion. I'm a bass player. I'm a huge Steve Harris fan. I was so excited for that. Here in my mind, I'm thinking that Steve Harris is going to come out and there's going to be this vintage Killers era Steve Harris bass playing on it, and it just isn't. It's stunk. Uh, this one was sort of in retro. Deep Purple, the self-titled Deep Purple record, the one with like the cover on it, the scary looking cover. I had Made in Japan. I had Machine Head, and I saw this is like, and it reminded me of the Black Sabbath Greatest Hits record album cover. And I thought it's gonna be so heavy. It's gonna be like it probably like the first Sabbath record, and it's just terrible. It's like garage rock. And I'll also shout out Geezer Butler's solo records. I remember hearing they were coming out. I was getting, I was in my mind thinking Geezer's the guy that he's the hippie of the band. He's the guy that wrote the lyrics to Spiral Architect. So in my mind, I'm thinking like it's going to be stuff like Spiral Architect all over it. And it turned out to be like Fear Factory, just shouting vocals. And it was totally not what I wanted to hear from Geezer Butler. So, all right.
You know,
Go
he
ahead.
did, he did those two albums. He did three actually. I didn't really like the third one. I actually liked the first two. But then if you ever heard the Geezer Butler band that never got
Yeah.
released, and that was like total like almost like melodic rock type stuff,
Yeah.
you know. Hey, one more I wanted to throw in. I was a big fan of the Darkness first album. I loved the Darkness's first album, still do. When the second album came out, One Way Ticket, I was so disappointed. I remember I was writing for a website at the time, and I remember I wrote the review while I was listening to it, and it was just about just it was horrible. Because there was a couple of good songs on it, but it's like here's a band that is trying to be Queen on their second album. I mean, they've just had this massive hit
Yeah.
record. Now they're coming out with something totally experimental. Just wasn't the record that they needed to do at that time, and it pretty much killed their career. It didn't do it bombed in the States and didn't do anything. And actually, over time, I like more of that album now. But at the time, I was just so disappointed in it. You know,
Yeah.
it's definitely they had a song called "Growing on Me," and that's one that definitely had to grow on me a little bit. You know.
Hey, how about I got one too, and that's we might I don't know if we've talked about this on the show before. I but Doc and Shadow Life, man, how awful is
Oh,
Oh
that record?
God,
yeah.
Terrible,
that
like
it was awful. I
terrible
did an
among
interview.
terrible. I mean, of if you took the 20 terrible records, it'd be the worst of the 20. Whatever 20, I'd rather listen to Nickelback than listen to Shadow Life.
It, I
Ouch.
remember I interviewed Don when that record came out, and the first question I asked him was, "How does Shadow Life stand up to your previous albums?" He goes, "Oh, I hate it. It's just that was a George and Jeff project. I had not much to do with it at all. I don't like it at all. It has nothing to do with Docking." And he's right to the point with it, you know. But yeah, it was like a total moody, grungy record. It just
Yeah.
sounded nothing like what you expect. And then they came back with Erase the Slate with Red Beach on guitar, and that was like back to tooth and
That's
nail
talking.
stuff.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
docking I wanted to hear. Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. There's our picks for some albums that were big letdowns for us from bands that we like. Let us know what you think of our picks. What are some of your picks? We've all got them out there. We've all got bands we like. We've all and then they got these band albums that just did not live up to our expectations. So let us know down in the comments down below. Make sure you check out our Spotify playlist, our Dudes Talking Metal Spotify playlist, and we'll see you at the next episode.